In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy.
This is it, folks. This is the 100th episode. What a pleasure it is to be with such an incredible founder that Amos is. And just wanted to say thank you again. Thank you for this long journey. This is the 100th. We'll aim for 200. We'll aim for 300. We'll aim for 1,000 even. This will be a very long journey. But just wanted to congratulate you again, and the winner of the giveaway will be announced next Monday. Thank you so much. Enjoy this discussion. Don't scale with headcounts, scale with intelligence. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin. Today we're diving into the depth of the unicorn era startup playbook, the rise of autonomous businesses powered by AI, and a mindset shift founders must embrace to build scalable, intelligent companies. Amos Bar Joseph is the founder of Swan AI, an AI go-to-market engine. They're redefining how sales and marketing team scale, not through headcounts, but through intelligence. A two-time successful founder who has built, scaled, and exited multiple B2B startups, Amos is now building in public the world's first autonomous business on a mission to reach 30 million AR with just 3 founders and a fleet of AI agents. His journey marks a turning point for the startup world, challenging founders to unlearn the industrial age assumption that growth must equal people. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. It supports how more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Amos Bar Joseph, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
Wow, I'm doing fantastic, Sam. Thanks for having me.
It's fantastic having you here. And these days, I'm having a lot of lovely conversation from people from Israel. It's very timely, and I think this conversation is going to be exceptional and quite futuristic, actually, in teams. But to kick us off, please tell us more about Swan AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Swan is kind of like Lovable for go-to-market. It's an AI go-to-market engineer that helps sales and marketing teams turn any go-to-market idea into an agentic workflow from prompt to pipeline in seconds. It's basically an AI agent that lives within Slack. It is connected to your CRM and sales automation tools and email automation, LinkedIn automation, and has connections to B2B data and contact information and things like that. And you can just build with it any kind of GTM motion of your dreams if you want to run intelligent outbound or run intelligent inbound or CRM enrichment or whatever. The sky is the limit.
Very cool. And I want to go back to the very beginning of all this for you, because you're a two-time exit basically founder, a lot of success basically in your past. Tell us more. Obviously, we're just talking about this offline, yet you always had sort of a keen interest for B2B sales and sort of the concept of client acquisition and so on. Where does that come from for you? What's the beginning of that journey?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sam. So I think that in every job that I had over the course of my life, I had some interaction with the sales aspect, and I really enjoyed it and felt like I'm good at it. So when I was 16 years old, I was a waiter, and some folks can think of as a waiter as a service provider. They focus more on the service and
Sure.
on the experience of the dining guests, but I looked at it as a selling opportunity to just, grow the, the check size of the table. And then, later on, I went to work at a travel, like outdoor equipment store. because I have my passion was, in traveling, and I love hiking and things like that. And I found
Interesting.
myself to be like the highest earning seller in the network because I just, sold like crazy travel equipment because I really enjoyed it and I enjoyed the challenge. And so I realized that my passion is in, selling to people, relating to their emotional being at any given point of time and understanding their needs and being able to articulate like a great solution to what they're looking for that could answer both their emotional needs and challenges that they're looking to solve. And over the course of my career, it evolved until Swan, which is actually maybe the biggest manifestation of it. It was just building an AI agent to help sales and marketing teams better sell and scale with intelligence, not with headcount.
Yeah, exactly. And what a perfect segue, actually. That was exactly where I was going next. You, from me watching your content, watching other interviews, and watching how perhaps you build publicly, you use this tagline very often, which is, again, not don't scale with headcount, scale with intelligence. Now, headcount is very simple to understand. Intelligence is a much broader terms, perhaps. So when you say this, from your perspective, what intelligence perhaps are you referring to in your words?
Yeah. So what we kind of like rise against and what we like gets our blood pressure going, flowing super hard in Swan is, what we call, the unicorn, the growth at all costs playbook, basically. And I did that twice, based on that playbook, trying to raise a fat seed before you have a product market fit. And then you grow to a team of 30 people before you get to your first $1 million in the ARR. And then you try to brute force your way kind of like, up to the next milestone. And you measure your success by team size and, valuation, and not in real value. And that led to kind of like a very crippled and, badly executed playbook that just, over time. And at this moment of time, I realized that, together with AI agents, there's an opportunity to rewrite, the startup playbook, how we scale business, basically. And at Swan, we're trying to practice what we preach. We're 3 founders. We're trying to get to $10 million ARR per employee. We don't have any other employees yet. It's just us and these AI agents trying to, redefine what scale means in an AI native world. And so when I refer to intelligence, I actually refer to the collaboration of human and AI together. Right. So intelligence, in my perspective, and to scale with intelligence, it's not just artificial intelligence. It's also human intelligence. But it's about using intelligence as the lever, not headcount.
Yes, absolutely. You talk about this briefly. The fact that you abandoned this playbook while you were successful at it twice, actually, quite in a very, you're still very youthful, actually, which is sort of amazing. That's really interesting to me because, this hyper growth model that you sort of once mastered, you're now sort of entering a phase where you say, you know what, this not only doesn't work anymore, and we see countless examples of it, but I'm going to build in public Swan to prove to the whole world that this is the new big things. Now, from your perspective, what made you abandon the unicorn growth at all sort of mindsets, and perhaps after playing in that game and being very successful at it, but most importantly, was it sort of a very specific moment? Was it sort of a realization of where the world was going and therefore you wanting to own in and better fit perhaps the world that is coming? How does that team from your perspective?
Yeah, so I wish I had a better answer actually than this one, but I would say that it actually was born from kind of like a resentment sentiment. So it was born out of this feeling that this can't be like, the playbook, that we should build companies that have meaningful impact on the world. Like I've seen, best friends of mine that are starting a company, and instead of trying to create value, they try to build a pitch deck and try to sign some logos to just appear on that pitch deck and try to crack the code on how they can get the highest valuation for a seed round without, realizing and finding anything that is valuable to the world. And in my 2 previous rounds, I felt like I was more obsessing about, the story in terms of like story for investors, and more obsessing about going after the playbook that was actually written by the investors, not the founders, eventually, growing valuations into a $1 billion valuation. Who benefits from a $1 billion valuation? It's the investors. It's not it's not the market. It's not the customers. It's not the world. It's the investors, and maybe, the small group of people that had, were big shareholders at the company. And over time, what happened to that playbook is that since the invention of the concept of MVP, and to those who are not super familiar with that, Eric Ries coined, the minimal viable product methodology in 2009, basically. So like 16 years ago. And we're still, using the same playbook. And what happened over the course of these 15 years is that it just got more and more expensive to build these companies. And you just needed more capital from the ground up to build these companies. And so when I came to this third company, Sam, to your question, I felt like I have such strong resentment against, the path that founders are taking when they try to follow the unicorn playbook. And luckily, I've seen, this concept of AI agents, which is, redefining everything we think about labor, basically. And I thought this is the moment of time to redefine the playbook. And it actually got me to start building in public. And we can talk about why I chose to do that, but it was the best decision I made in my life.
It really reminds me of a quote by Alfred North Whitehead, and he was talking about the fact that civilization advances by really extending perhaps the number of operations that can be performed without thinking about them. Basically, like you said, they become so ingrained in what we're doing that it just become perhaps what it is, and ubiquitous, perhaps, as some would say. And you were talking about this sort of hybrid, the human and machine perhaps hybrid that becomes Swan AI. You're sort of, from my perspective at least, you're sort of conducting an orchestra here. And I talk about this very often, about the fact that the world will be more and more hybrids of human beings and technology. And I mean, it's not really debatable at this point. We see this in pretty much every single industry's periods. But I'm really interested from a market adaptation perspective. What mindset shift perhaps you think that founders must embrace, perhaps, so that they can go into AI and understand perhaps just how leverageable it is as a business, as a core business function, not just sort of a tool on the side, as a core business function? What's the distinction there?
Yeah, so at Swan, and I think that every autonomous business should actually use this principle, we have like the most fundamental rule, which is it's a constraint. It says that whenever you have a scaling challenge, you can't throw bodies at the problem. You must first throw intelligence at it. And when you really start to radically practice this constraint, then you start to discover new ways to collaborate with AI and to implement AI within your business. And if we take, for example, support. So we are just 3 people at Swan. We have, getting close to 200 customers. These are like businesses that we support. It's not like we can just tell them to go F themselves and never get, don't give them support. Sorry for my French. But basically, you need to build these relationships and you need to provide serious support if you want to, have these contracts in place. And we started getting swamped by these support tickets. And so, the first thing that a startup usually does, it's that they hire a support team, right? They don't even hire a support rep. They hire a support manager, or like they get a director of ops that hire, 3 people to handle these all of these support tickets. And we said, okay, we can't do that. We can't, just throw bodies at the problem. We got to throw intelligence at it. So what should we do? And so we started having Swan as, a conversational interface within Slack, answering basic tickets. And that was great. That reduced, 30% of the workload. That was still amazing.
Not
Nice,
bad, yeah.
not bad, nice work, but still a lot of workload on the founders. And then we realized, you know what? If someone doesn't know the answer, why not just let it escalate it to us, and then we could use it to answer the user. So it's like more immediate, less, intermediates, less need for, hopping between email and, messages, etc. The user asks it in Swan. Swan will escalate it to us, and we will kind of like reply, and while using Swan context and, natural language understanding and things like that. Amazing. That really improved, the work. But then what we realized is that if we're answering these, questions that Swan doesn't know the answer to, and based on its knowledge base, then Swan can document this Q&A in its knowledge base, so that we don't need to actually repeat every answer twice. We only answer a question once. And so, we discovered this, new mechanism of support that really fits our business and how we run our business. And eventually, kind of like accidentally almost, we built internally a self-learning support system that can grow with us and now handles almost 80% of the tickets autonomously, in a very successful manner. Our users are super happy about it. And I tell this story, Sam, as as a lesson that when you actually put that constraint that you can throw bodies at the challenge, the scaling challenge, you throw intelligence at it, you can discover new ways that your business can form around and together with the AI at its core.
I will definitely steal this from you, by the way. When there's a scaling problem, don't throw bodies at it, throw intelligence. I think that's phenomenal. Yeah, I think it reminds me a lot of what's Stephen Hawking was talking about in and out of his novel, was sort of this concept that the thing to fear knowledge-wise is not the lack of it, is the illusion of it. When you think you know something and it's wrong, and therefore you just do something on the wrong basically assumptions, that is very, very scary. Now, those assumptions, I think, are multiplied by the fact that, again, this tech, all things considered, is still extremely new, and we're definitely going to be talking about the gay roles, because they're still very important moving forward. I saw this interesting post of you a few days ago, which I will definitely circle back on. But something that I think is a misconception that you're directly challenging is perhaps the headcount growth, because you're totally right. And I had one exit myself, and I've been basically part of many dozens and dozens of startups, and it's always the same thing. It's always the same thing. We have a business is a solution to problems, so we came up with the solutions, and then, like you said, for the very, very beginning of, at least perhaps until we raise a fund, most of the time a seed round, there's this sort of concept in which the only shareholders that matters are the people that get the money in, not the people we serve, not the people internal to the project, only people with the money. And it's very interesting, because we've been seeing more and more people putting their life into projects in which, unfortunately, either the founder just opt out, and therefore basically they lose what they once basically found very, very valuable. But also this concept of labor, which I think is fantastic for the future of civilizations. And when I look at, I'm a huge history buff, Amos. I love to just read a lot. And it's interesting because when you take a look at the most successful civilization ever, they always had intellectuals, always had thinkers. Think about ancient Greeks, think about Romans, the Roman Empire, and so on, as the pinnacle of those society. The technical labor, perhaps, and so on, was done, perhaps was outsourced to others. In their case, was human beings, which we can definitely morally debate. But in this case, if it's technology, then fantastic. Let's human beings be best at what we're best, which is channeling, in my opinion, channeling from our soul this concept of intuitions and love for others, and perhaps creativity also, which is very, very hard to mimicate. Even if AI is getting better at it, I think we're still very far from it being perhaps replacing the creativity of human beings. But from your perspective, talking about the fact that, again, assume knowledge that is wrong is the most determinant things to growth. How can founders unlearn, or perhaps begin to unlearn, the industrial perhaps age assumptions that growth must equal people, and how can perhaps we use intelligence to how you use intelligence to teach them and perhaps rewire it to a point where they don't make their mistakes again.
Yeah. It's a question that I get often, and it's a hard one to answer. I think that, if you're a founder out there, or even like an executive, like a tech executive, you probably fall into one of these two buckets, and each bucket has like a different resolution, let's say. The first bucket is that you're experienced, like you're a third-time founder, like you're a 20 years tech executive. And the second one is that you're inexperienced and you're starting right now, right? Or you just started in the last few years, right? And so, for the first bucket, they need to unlearn a lot of things that they felt like was their advantage, and it's definitely difficult for these people that it was their advantage, the experience that is compounding over the years, and what they need to do is to kind of like go back to start thinking first principles about everything. They need to question like everything they're doing right now, and instead of going externally, going outwards and trying to look for answers in content creators or in reports of Deloitte or things like that, they should look inwards, and they should start developing that AI muscle, which I call, basically, which is just start getting your hands dirty, start playing with the technology, start getting your people to play with that technology. You don't need to be an AI expert to become an AI expert today. It's a new technology. No one has advantage over you. You don't need to build rocket science to become like an AI expert today.
Okay.
And so just start developing that muscle. Basically, stop, procrastinating. Stop, thinking about it. Stop reading about it. Start doing. Instead of spending your time on learning, concepts about AI, that this landscape is constantly changing, and no one knows the truth. No one really knows how it's going to evolve. Your only chance in positioning yourself, in the best way towards this unknown future is by building the muscle. Building the AI muscle. And the AI muscle is not about going to the library and reading. It's more like going to the gym and pushing weights, right? So it's not about educating yourself. It's about just, interacting with the AI in a way that becomes seamless to you, in a way that it's so embedded in your workflow that you can't really work without AI. And, to get today, I spend like 90% of my day working in some capacity with an artificial intelligence, right? And so it became, such an integral part of how I think and how I interact with a computer. And that positions me to the future where, the web is AI native and computers are AI natives and robots are AI native. Not the fact that I know what does it mean to do embeddings or to fine tune a model or how to write a good prompt. This is not what will make me, the best person in this future. It's actually the fact that I have this muscle that I've been practicing all day, every day.
Yeah. I think you always come back to the same thing, right? In theory and practice are the same thing, but in practice, it definitely isn't. And one thing, you have a very interesting article on getswans.com talking about this metrics that now is used more and more, which I'd love to talk to you about with you, which is why revenue per employee is the only metric that matters for founders. And we see more and more tech people that basically build these dashboards now of this quest of the 1% unicorn, which is very interesting. And more importantly, it's again such a tale of efficiency, such a tale perhaps of less is more. From your perspective, for those in which perhaps are less familiar with these metrics, please introduce it the way you see it, but then enlighten us on why it is so important for a modern business to take a look at that metrics as a central point of focus.
Yeah, definitely. So, we just started Swan we started talking about, ARR per employee or ARR per FTE. And we felt like, we were the only ones who are doing it, and people are looking at it. What are you talking about? And now it's just becoming more and more ubiquitous, and we're so happy to see it. Basically, the North Star in the unicorn playbook is valuation, right? It's just valuation. That's what you care about when you're building a startup. And then you care also about like your team size. So if you've seen some, fundraising announcements, what they would say in these fundraising announcements is like, they are now valued at $300 million, and they intend to double their team size over the next 6 months, right? This is what, they will take pride of. And, when we started Swan building this autonomous business, we kind of like thought to ourselves, what should be the metric of an autonomous business? And we realized that it's, revenue per employee, because two major aspects, right? The first one is that it's the best measure to foresee the ability of a company to become AI native, to kind of like for their humans to collaborate with AI. And I'll explain why. It's because if you can scale ARR per employee, it means that with the same amount of headcount, you can generate more revenue. How do you do that? Most likely with the introduction of intelligence, right, within your company, with the collaboration with AI, basically. So, for companies to actually generate an enormous amount of ARR per employee, they must be doing something different. And if you are building a company in an AI native world and you have a very low ARR per employee, it means that you're not leveraging this technology in the right way as a business, right? So I think that as the maturity of AI will progress towards, adoption within businesses, then the more and more people will look at, ARR per employee as the metric that will signal like how AI native are you really, right? And then from a second perspective, why this is such an important metric, it's not only about efficiency, it's about value alignment with the market, right? Because when you focus on valuation inflation, then we get these stories of, startups that are just focused on pumping the vision and are just focused on secondaries and selling their shareholders, and investors that just try to, get away quickly. And when we move that narrative from valuation inflation to ARR per employee, we move it to value creation, basically, because ARR is much closer to value being created, because revenue is one of the best mechanism of the market to weight, the value of a company, right?
Absolutely.
And so when we try to move the narrative towards that, we try to create much more alignment between, the companies, the vendors, and, the buyers, the market.
I love it. It was William Gibson that was talking about the fact that the future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed yet, right? And it's and that's a very interesting thought, because when I study, I love to study biography, and one thing I always find is that they always stretch how important it is to invest in technology. They are always on the lookout for what's new. Is it better than what we have? Yes, perfect. Let's be the first one to get our hand on it, because that's a main differentiator. And I think that the concept of agentic AI paired with the perhaps everything that is currently happening in robotics and so on, there's just no doubt anymore. You could have maybe doubt when ChatGPT perhaps came up on the market and just blew up everything from a marketing and even of a educational perspective. But nowadays, look, it's already here. Either you come in or you get left behind, and that's something that is very, very important to keep in mind. And anything want to add on that?
Yeah, definitely, Sam, because I love so much, the sentence about, the future is already here, is just, distributed unevenly. And I feel like, for folks who get it, it's like a superpower in life. And I'll explain why. Because some of the biggest advantages that we can take as individuals and as executives or founders of a startup or like a company is if we have like a unique insight on the world that no one else shares, or maybe just few people share that insight. And if you kind of like accidentally interact with this unique insight, and you're one of the few people on planet Earth to know that and can act upon it in some way, then you can get an unfair advantage significantly in kind of like the course of your career or in the company that you're building. And, when we built Swan, and the fact that, the reason why we're building this autonomous business in public and try to kind of like obsess over the learnings that we have is so that we can maximize the amount of these unique insights that we interact with. And the fact that we are kind of like living in the future of company scaling in some way, that kind of like creates a flywheel, which is basically feeds, our learnings and kind of like generate this unique insights that can inform our product, our go-to-market strategy, how we use, intelligence in our day-to-day, how we think about, our infrastructure, everything basically. And so what we try to do is gain this unfair advantage as much as we can by exposing ourselves to, a routine that maximizes the amount of unique insights that we can get access to.
Yeah, no, 100%. I want to touch upon the psychology of founder, perhaps in the age of AI. One of the most interesting thing that I found is that the concept of letting go of control is one of the hardest thing to do. All right, delegations and letting go of control, letting go of that ego, perhaps. Right, Marcus Aurelius talk about the ego that is very necessary in life. And it's sort of the one of the hardest psychological perhaps challenges, especially for high achievers, especially for high achievers that have already proven themselves to be successful at what they're able to accomplish. Now, from your perspective, is there sometimes any fears or perhaps breakthroughs that comes from scaling a company without building a traditional team, without perhaps this concept of hierarchy and I'm the boss and I'm the one in control? Is there any fear that comes from your perspective with that, or how did you sort of go into it and just said, you know what? The best thing right now is just to let go and build something that is again this hybrid that you call this intelligence model first. I'm just trying to see from a psychological perspective, is there anything that sometimes haunts you?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that haunt me. But in terms of like what was interesting, what you said is like how, when you grow a company and you have this, the fear of how do you scale and how do you kind of like delegate? And actually, the autonomous business tries to solve that actually in some way.
Yes.
And it's not like we're just trying to scale with intelligence. The autonomous business is actually a flat organization where you don't have a lot of, management layers. And so you just have one layer of people where every person is kind of like, the owner of their goal and have the autonomy to, just take care of their KPI. And they can work with, an army of AI agents around them that power their, every move basically. And what you get is that you don't have these, middle management of delegation, basically, yes. Right? You get what we call like the highest return on management that you can get, basically, because usually in a traditional company, the more that you scale, the return on management decreases because you just add more managers in the layer, and every manager starts, just working on approvals and budgets and bureaucracies and processes and meetings, etc. And that just, decreases that return on management. But in an autonomous business, you have this flat organization. Every manager that you put manages a team of AI agents and have the autonomy to go and pursue their goal. So from a psychological perspective, Sam, it really helps because I know that I'm not just putting managers just for the managerial aspect of it. And that is amazing. But from the other side, I just put someone on the wheel and they're almost kind of like driving their own company to wherever they want to go. They have full autonomy to do whatever they want. They don't report to anyone. They don't work with anyone in some way. They have, their capacity. They can collaborate with other team members. But in terms of like authority and autonomy, they have 100% of both of these. And so the fear of, putting the wheel in the hands of a person like that when you're running your company is terrifying. Definitely.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Okay, so you still have those fears, but That's interesting you mentioned this, because for me it pairs so well with your mentality of why you build in public, right? Building in public also is very scary in the fact that when things go well, fantastic, everything is there applauding you. But when things are not going well and you're building in public, then perhaps you need to face the heat. And so to me, you were slightly touching on that prior to this conversation, but why building in public? What do you think you build in public? What do you think Lovable build in public? What do you think with this concept, which is newer? I wouldn't say it's a completely new thought, but definitely newer from a startup perspective. Where does that come from, and why decide to jump on it?
Yeah, so it had two motivations to build in public. So the first one is that, when we set out to build Swan as an autonomous business, we actually, had this aspiration to rewrite the playbook, right? And so when we want to rewrite the playbook, and a playbook doesn't become a playbook if just this one team follows it. And so we wanted this to be like the new playbook, and that in 5 more years, no one will build a startup. It's boring and it's not efficient, and no one values a startup anymore. Everyone would like to build an autonomous business. That's what they would do, basically, because that's the hottest thing to do, and that's like the most interesting thing to do. And just startup is like building a low tech company like 30 years ago, basically.
Wow.
And so that was like the main aspiration. And that's why we realized that building in public is a great opportunity to create a community, to create followership of people who are they share the values of scaling with intelligence, not with headcount, and they want to understand how to do that. But the second motivation, which like really got clear to me as I just started building in public, was the fact that when you put a gun to your head and you commit to writing a lot about your startup, then your thoughts get crystal clear and your vision crystallizes as well. And you learn a lot of things about your business that you didn't really know until you sat down in front of the computer and thought, what should I tell the world today? And I've spent, I had so many times that I started writing something, and then I said to my co-founders, wow, you know what? This is actually what we're doing. We're doing X, Y, Z, and it's crazy right now. I just thought about it, and I can't believe we should double down on that. This should become like the core principle in how we develop agents, for example, or how we develop an autonomous business, etc. And so the practice of building in public really creates this amazing, area of growth for understanding your business and the market and your vision.
Yeah, because you're pairing a decentralized execution with a centralized vision. You mentioned this word vision, very important, one of the most important words in the whole vocabulary, in my opinion. And in many ways, again, since the managerial team, if you will, the leadership team is so narrow, so tight, the vision perhaps is so commonly shared. And that's something I always talk about when you grow companies, not only the complexity of it, but also perhaps the fact that it dilutes sometimes, not always. If it's done right, it doesn't. But most of the time, I see that it dilutes perhaps the overall vision, because now every basically little people basically chime into what it is the actual business is doing, and therefore sometimes I feel like the target is slowly but surely getting deviated from a growth perspective. Now that is not the case from your model, which is an hybrid model. I'm still very interested though. The concept of leadership has always been perhaps described as a man leader, right? Leading other human beings to be able to build something that matters. Now, what you guys are doing is you're leading AI, basically agents, technology in this case. So I'm wondering from your perspective, what does leadership actually look like when the execution bucket, which is a huge portion of any business, is entirely or pretty much entirely handled by AI? How does that all work?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Sam. And I just want to pause here before I answer to just say thank you for coining the term decentralized execution. I love it. And I
Okay.
feel like it captures the essence of an autonomous business, in the sense of, when you're building with AI and you want to give it, the autonomy that it deserves, basically, but maintain the human element, it creates this, decentralized execution, basically, motion. And
Yes.
when you connect, this notion of leadership within a decentralized, executing organization. So what is that role of leadership within that context, right? And
Yes.
I would say that if you look at the last, hundreds of years, maybe hundreds of years, you like history, Sam, right? So you might
Yes.
say that as, humanity, as civil, as like a Western civilization. So focus on that. If you look at the Western civilization, you can see that the trend is that we're decentralizing the execution of that civilization, right? If we had, monarchies, and that, actually transformed into countries, which actually
Yes.
transformed into companies, which actually transform into communities, which is always kind of like in that motion. And I feel like an autonomous business is kind of like a continuation of that trend, that instead of having, Steve Jobs sitting at the helm, or like Mark Benioff sitting at the helm of Salesforce and trying to lead, a 20,000 people organization, with a single vision, you get these autonomous businesses that are small and have, this decentralized execution. And what's the role of leadership within this context, Sam? I would say that it is to put in language the vision as crystal clear as possible. And why it's important to put in language, because when you work with AI, when you scale with intelligence, not headcount, it's not about bureaucracies, it's about language. That's how you control the AI. That's how you can control a decentralized team, basically, is with words. How do you describe your vision? So to lead an autonomous business, you need to have the ability to articulate your vision in the best way possible, so that your words will proliferate across the business. Why it's important to say,
Wonderful.
to put in language.
Yeah, I think that
because
communications is a thought that changed my life, Amos, and it was actually a very simple one, but it's typically the case. And we'll talk about the simplicity, and you're really sort of a leader in this concept of simplicity also, which I really appreciate. And it's everything that happens in the world happens with people talking in a place. Basically, it's people talking in a place. And when you look at it this way, you sort of understand that from a variable perspective, the real superpower is communication. Is how well can I not only be able to help people, how to teach people how to perceive myself, which is a big concept psychologically wise, but also how astute can I be language wise to basically be able to, with precision, describe what I want to perhaps happens in the current world. And so from your perspective, with this hybrid model, it's even more important to be a world-class communicator. Would that be fair to say?
That would be extremely fair to say, Sam. And I would just add on it, just from an evolution perspective. If we look at, the skills that humans required to, from an evolution perspective, early on, it was more like physical skills, right? To create fire and to fight with, beasts, and to climb a tree to get some food. And then it was more mechanics. Right, you need to actually operate a wagon to get your agricultural farm running in some way, and then if you fast forward to like the last 20 years, it became knowledge. We had this notion of knowledge workers, right? We had people who they know something about the world that other people don't. Then that disappeared. Knowledge isn't important anymore because you could ask Google anything. So instead of knowing, the skill became asking questions, right? And finally today, instead of asking questions, it's about communication. It's communicating with the AI. That becomes the most important skill to thrive in the environment. And so it's a super interesting lens to look at the last 20 years. Even we had knowledge, then we have questions. Now it's communication.
Interesting. And from a getting paid perspective, from a productivity perspective, I always love this Bob Proctor, perhaps sort of thought. He said that first you get paid for what you do, then you get paid for what you know, and then you get paid for who you are. And it's a very interesting way to sort of see progressionally, perhaps, where you are from a money gathering or productivity efficiency standpoint. Because, like you mentioned, I want to ask you. You're a very intelligent man, so I'll ask you a societal question that is a little bit to the side of the business realms for a second. If perhaps a vision of the future is these awesome autonomous agents, perhaps autonomous business which we work in hybrid with technology, and we remove perhaps the necessity for the middle management layers, what are we gonna do with this sort of concepts? And I really believe this, and not because I'm cynical about the world, but I'm just the way that I perceive the world as we currently speak. What are all these people that would typically handle these worlds, traditionally handle these worlds? What are they going to do from a societal perspective? Have you seen sort of further down the line, perhaps there's always going to be the builders, the visionaries, the people who can perhaps take advantage of the opportunity market-wise. But for those that cannot, and therefore was hired to build somebody else's vision, what are we going to be doing with all these people? Amos, have you thought of that?
I think about it a lot, Sam. I would say that my answer differs between kind of like, let's say, short-term and long-term.
Okay, please.
Because, when you look long-term about, the strength of the AI and the capabilities and the potential, it's hard to put a limit on it. And when you look at, when you ask yourself, okay, if there isn't any limit, then everything is in danger, quote unquote, to be replaced by an AI, right? But before I kind of like try to get to touch upon that like dystopian scenario, if you look at the short term, like the next decade, okay, which is super relevant, for and I'm more like a practical person. So for me, yes. I look at the next decade and I ask myself, what will happen over that course of time, and not beyond that, because we can't know what will happen over more than 10 years. So if you look at the next 10 years, I don't think that the AI revolution is substantially different than other technical revolution from the productivity and the job market. So I think that, if we look at the next 10 years, AI will create, massive opportunities within the market. It will create a lot of, labor opportunities and productivity gains that we as humans just know how to utilize productivity gains to create more jobs, basically. And so, just as if you were working at an archive of, I don't know, like a library or like, an old business or something. And so, you after the computer came and the internet came, you didn't have your job anymore.
Interesting. Yeah. It reminds me of, Picasso was talking about the fact that every act of creation is first an act of destruction. So there's this concept of, what the world is becoming, perhaps first needs to perhaps understand not only the present, but destroy what's not going to be part of the future. And I think it's interesting you mentioned the concept of, ultimate efficiency. I was just rereading Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, which you're probably familiar with that, Brian. And he was talking about the fact that, from his perspective, perfection is not when you cannot add anything, basically anything more. It's when you cannot subtract anything that actually needs to be there, right? That's what perfection is from a definition perspective. So in many ways, that's what you're aiming at. That's what you're not only morally aiming at, but also productively, basically aiming at, is how can our perhaps core principle be so tight and coherent that perhaps we can reduce everything else that is truly just noise, right? Truly just noise to impress people that really doesn't matter anyways, and make sure that basically the core vision is only what absolutely needs to be, and not just perhaps this sort of, like we said, sort of this thought of impressing external shareholders that perhaps may not even need to be there in the first place. So I really like it from that standpoint. I think there's a moral good component of what you're talking about, which I think is maybe underrated by a lot of people. 2 days ago, Amos, or at least you reposted it 2 days ago. I don't know if the post is actually 2 days ago, 2 days old, but it was a post about the fact that one of your AI agents tried to commit fraud. And it was a very interesting post. People can look it up on LinkedIn if they like. And that is very interesting because every single AI master that I talk with, they always talk to me about the fact that we need to be careful about hallucinations, about to be careful about what are what guardrails perhaps are necessary to make sure that we are putting in place and ensuring that the AI decisions is actually aligned with our values, right? And you went in real depth about the fact that he built a product that was not ever sold by you to somebody, and actually was able to sell it to somebody, and a client of yours came back to you saying, hey, by the way, what's new with the Observer? But it actually doesn't exist at all. And so that's quite amazing, actually. But, from your perspective, when you're thinking about this, not only for Swan itself, but from an industry perspective, from a business landscape perspective, what has been the most effective guardrails that you've been able to put in place to ensure that this happens as few times as possible, perhaps?
If we acknowledge that, these large language models are basically task completion models, then we understand that they have, the bias to serve, basically, to perform the task. And so we need to build with guardrails that acknowledge that bias and creates a different bias, basically. And so that's what we did at Swan, for example, when we built our own support system. So instead of having a bias towards resolving the ticket, we had a bias towards escalating the ticket towards the founders. So the task is you should escalate it unless you know the answer, right? Instead of you should resolve the ticket unless you don't know the answer, and then you need to escalate it. And so what happens here is that you get two different outcomes in both cases. So if you guide the agent to resolve the ticket unless it doesn't know the answer, what you will get is kind of like a portion of resolutions that are based on hallucinations or inappropriate resolutions. But when you create a bias towards escalation, you will get a portion of events where the AI escalated, but was actually, it had the knowledge to answer, to resolve it. Right? So you will get escalations that were actually supposed to be appropriate resolutions. And that is something that you are willing to take because, we're in B2B and we're okay with actually resolving fewer, more tickets rather than just giving wrong, false, responses to our customers. So to your question, Sam, the best guardrail actually, and the simplest one, is to think about, what is the bias that I'm actually creating in my AI system?
Great.
Nice. Absolutely. And to me, it's very interesting. Just food for thoughts here, but we've been having this conversation more and more, and we're seeing them online about the fact that, well, AI is imperfect. Be very careful because it might be wrong for information. And yes, you should be careful. That being said, imagine if we treated human being this way. Amos, can we just acknowledge that? Can you imagine if any time you're talking to anybody, you're just saying, well, actually, last time we discussed this was not right. I will never trust you anymore. Life doesn't work this way. All right. And therefore, everybody has biases. We both have biases. Everybody else has biases. So perhaps being very aware of that is fantastic. And I think that, to me, perhaps as long as this acknowledgement feeds the fact that we want to do better and we want to perhaps prevent these type of perhaps derailing, then it's fantastic. If we use it as a way to condemn such an awesome technology, I think that's where I personally do not recommend doing that at all, because it's just a false expectation of what, well, first of all, perfection is. Perfection is divine, and this world is not is not part of it. Let's just put it this way. So that's first. But second of all, I think it's a great to learn from this cautionary tales, and I think that you explained it very well. Talking about the constraint aspect of everything, one thing that I love when I study creatives, when I study basically painters, when I study people, writers also, which I love, is that there's something very amazing that happens with creativity when you constrain yourself to a singular outcome. So instead of being very scattered attention-wise, which is 99% of people online these days, just jumping from one idea to the other, there's beauty in constraint and sort of the constraint-driven innovation, perhaps, let's just put it this way. And with your, workforce, 3 people. Let's just think about this. Yeah, a lot of people in the audience have much bigger companies without nearly as much impact, and we're just going to be putting this way. So 3 people without any sort of this concept of, well, let's outsource this task to a consultant, let's outsource this thing to this guys that is external to the project. I'm really interested from your perspective, what creative breakthroughs have emerged specifically because you could not hire, specifically because you don't basically go external, but only look internal, perhaps, to be able to solve and grow everything. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So I think that most of our learnings, evolved from that constraint. And I would actually totally agree, Sam, that it's such an important rule in creation, not only like creating art or content, but in creating a business.
Yeah.
You need to set constraints. You need to have clear boundaries. And even I feel like a lot of early stage founders, they talk to me and they say, our total addressable market is huge. We want to sell to every company. We actually can sell this solution to every company. I always tell them it's the wrong type of thinking. You need to sell it to a very small niche of companies first. Set these boundaries. So I love that, and I just wanted to echo that. But so we learned so many things out of this constraint driven approach. But I would say one of the highlight maybe one thing that stood up to me the most, which is maybe kind of like intuitive when we think about it, and it's not surprising because AI is intuitive, super intuitive, and so we call it feedback loops. And when you design a startup, you need to architect your company to maximize the amount of feedback loops that you can create over a single course of time, like over a month. Like, how many feedback loops can we create? Why? Because you're learning. You're not like an incumbent enterprise company that trying to execute over something that has already been learned. You are learning. You're trying to give birth to something new, and you're kind of constantly learning. So what you need to optimize is a learning mechanism. And how can you optimize a learning mechanism? By embedding as much feedback loops at every process of your business. So forth. That makes total sense. But what happens when you build like a hybrid human AI business?
Right.
How can we think about feedback loops in that context? And so what happened initially is that, we tried building these feedback loops into the business, but our AI agents didn't have them. And so our business evolved, but our agents didn't. And so we spent so much time on trying to fix them in some way, right? Try to say, they're not relevant anymore because our business evolved in some way because of the feedback loop. We learned something new. Our business evolved. That impacted some agents in some way. Now we need to fix them. But what we realized that today, instead of trying to build, super impactful AI agents that can solve for all these use cases, we try to build them as lean, as simple as possible, but with feedback loops built in so that we can tell them as we grow with them, you know what? This is how we want you to act. You know what? Here is an additional context. You know what? I actually want you to act differently because we learned that X. And so that every agent that we introduce internally, we actually build them inherently from day one with this feedback loop mechanism that we can actually provide them with the feedback that we learn so they can learn alongside our business.
Yes, feedback loops. I mean, Justin Walsh talked about this a lot on LinkedIn, which I absolutely love that guy. And there's this very interesting. There's the founder of Quest Nutrition, Tom Bilyeu, if I don't butcher his last name, was talking about the fact that this is a superpower because now with AI and the fact that you can test whatever you're building so quickly. You don't have to go the traditional routes of I'm working on something, and for the first 6 months, we're just trying to, again, either raise a fund or just trying to perhaps prove, like you said, the TAM, which is always 1,000 times too big anyways, minimum. So it's very interesting to sort of kind it from a technology perspective where you can literally build, let's use your MVP term once again, that we can literally build an MVP in a weekend, test it on the marketplace basically because the cost now of testing your ideas is so low these days with social media being free and so on, that this concept of feedback loop, I believe, is now one of the main superpowers because whatever you have right now, not only will need to get better as the market is getting better, but like you said, you get now, coming back to the term of the observer, which I think was a very interesting, you can observe yourself working basically through it. Like Kierkegaard was talking about this, the Norwegian philosopher was saying that it's a shame that we need to live life basically moving forward into it because it only makes sense looking backward. So when you now have tools to look backward, you learn upon yourself to not make those mistakes, then teach the technology that you're using to not make these mistakes anymore because of the added context. So everything is just streamlined in a way that is just so amazing. And I think it's just, that's why I get so passionate about it, because it is so exceptional. And I want you to end this interview like always with the future, perhaps. So I go on a little bit of a context friend there, and then I'll let you hit it out of the park as always. So Y Combinator just had their spring, obviously, perhaps seminar, however you want to call it. And one thing that I found very interesting, and like to hear you as somebody within this field, is that out of the 144 startups that was pitched, 67 of them, which is 46% of everybody that pitched, were building AI agents. All right, let's just think about that for a second. And then, so perhaps there's starts at Peter Thiel, for example, talking about the fact that competition is for losers, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But the second thing, though, which is just reaffirming from market perspective, is there's an IBM survey that was also showcasing that 70% of executives think that agentic AI is important for their organization's future. So people is getting to understand that this is important. This is going to be part of our company moving forward. Though the number of people trying to solve that problem is also increasing basically dramatically from these new stats that we've now been given. So from your perspective, when you're thinking about the future of AI, the future of agentic AI as a component perhaps of this bigger landscape, what are you guys at Get One doing to stay ahead? And perhaps when you're thinking about this staying ahead concept, are you getting worried about the fact that perhaps there's an overflooding amount of solutions getting pulled into the same marketplace at the same time, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I think that I look at it from both like a go-to-market perspective and a vision perspective, like a product vision perspective, because I think that, competition touches these two surface areas, like your product and your go-to-market, basically. So first of all, I would say that it's getting extremely easier to, and you mentioned that earlier, Sam, to ideate and bring solutions to the market.
Oh yeah.
And so, what is kind of like happening to software market is like, it's like selling bananas. Okay, it's simple to create like this, to build like a grocery store within your within your neighborhood. Like it's very simple, it's very accessible for someone like an entrepreneur to rent a store and to buy a large inventory of groceries and to open a grocery store. And the same thing is happening to software. There isn't any kind of like barriers of entry to this market. That is what's kind of like being happening. We're seeing that this democratization of software around the world.
Sure.
And what that creates is a dynamic that go to market and becomes the most important component of a startup today, basically. So at Swan, we know that to rise above the noise, we need to have the most efficient and powerful go-to-market motion. And what we're doing is that we're not, we got to where we are right now with zero ad dollar budget. We don't have sales development representatives cold calling our buyers. What we're actually doing is we're building a movement of the autonomous business movement. Basically, what we're trying to create is a future where, there are hundreds of thousands of autonomous businesses out there, and they all use Swan to power their go-to-market operations, basically. So that is on the go-to-market front. We have a, radically different way to go to market, which is kind of like a winner takes it all, because if we will be able to create that movement, then we will be, the number one brand for these SMBs, where they look to buy, an AI agent for, to scale their revenue with intelligence, not headcount. It will become synonym Swan, basically. So no matter how many competitors enter the market, we will still be the number one brand, because we built that network effect, that viral story that creates this moat, you could say. So that is from a go-to-market perspective.
Lovely.
But then from a product perspective, I actually think, and now we're getting a bit into kind of like the landscape of, a little bit technical and a little bit, B2B software in some sense, but I actually believe that there's not going to be a lot of AI agents in the future. Okay, there's actually going to be few AI agents. They will become the system of action. So what we're actually transitioning here, it's an interface revolution. That is the revolution of the AI agents is mainly an interface revolution. That's what is the biggest thing that is happening to how we interact with computers and machines, is the interface. And what will happen is there will be a very bloody bath over that interface, over that system of action that is connected to your context, your data, your conversations, and is connected to your systems. And it is able to synthesize both context, intelligence, and systems to act on your behalf. Okay, that is the system of action, the interface, and there will be very few who will win that battle. So ChatGPT might be, one of them. Gemini, Claude of Anthropic. These players are fighting for the system of action of the enterprise. They want to be the place where, if you want to work with your systems, you go there. Basically, that's what you do. But Swan will be the system of action for your go-to-market. So we believe that in the 5 more years, there will be much less AI agents in the go-to-market space. There will be very few, and Swan will be one of them.
The winners always take it all, but the best way to predict the future is to create it. Mr. Amos Bar Joseph, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Meaningful Podcast. Thank you so much for your wealth of knowledge, and you have a very, I suppose, you have a very sort of friendly personality to you, which makes you very, very accessible. I can totally understand what you're doing so well, social media-wise. And I would love if you can share some last words of wisdom with our audience, please.
Yeah, so I would say that you should stop obsess over being better. You should start obsessing over being different, over maximizing your characteristics that are powerful. We're living in a world where you have all the tools around you to to bring the best out of you. And the people who really flourish in our culture in our company, people who stay loyal to themselves and actually were able to bring the best out of themselves to the world. And I think it's an important lesson. If you're listening out there, stop obsessing over what's out there and start looking inwards and identify that superpower that you have and double down on that.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.